Hello, my name is Kyle Steele. I'm a candidate for Norman City Council Ward 6 in the upcoming election cycle, and this is a summary for the City Council study session that occurred on January 6th, 2026. As usual, the agenda packet and timestamps to various points of the meeting will be linked down below. First part of this meeting was over a survey regarding a potential homeless shelter. It was a really interesting survey. They kind of show the results, and they are going to be made available on the city website. But I actually do encourage everyone to take a look at this portion of the meeting just to see the raw numbers from the results of this survey. But to summarize it, the majority of people do recognize that homelessness is a serious issue in Norman, and the majority of people do support some kind of bond for a permanent shelter. However, there are concerns over what that bond may end up costing. Essentially, what the survey showed is that the people who are opposed to a shelter, they're not opposed to it, because it's a shelter. They're opposed to it because of the potential cost. Now, specifically for Ward 6, since that's the ward I'm running for, I'm just going to run through these stats real quick. Essentially, 56 or 58 Ward 6 voters were surveyed at a random sample, and 93% of these Ward 6 voters said that homelessness is either a serious or very serious issue. 70% of those surveyed in Ward 6 agreed or strongly agreed that homeless shelters are important to have available in the community or some form or fashion. Once again, encourage everyone to look at this meeting. They really break down the numbers, and if you don't want to take a look at the meeting, then by the time this video is up, hopefully the PowerPoint is made available on the city website as well, because they said they were going to be posting that. The second part of this meeting was over the design and cost estimates for the homeless shelter. Again, if you're interested in how the homeless shelter is going to be designed or what it's may end up look like, they showed some concept pictures. Again, relevant link down below. But the main thing, main takeaway, is that the construction cost is expected to be just under $8 million. So that means that if it's financed through a bond, that bond would cost $11 million due to the debt associated with the construction. Now, in the event that the final project for the shelter doesn't end up costing $8 million, like let's say it's a little less, any money left over just goes to the servicing of that bond. So just as a hypothetical example, if the bond proposal does end up being for $11 million, then what you're essentially voting on is you approve up to $11 million in a bond. It could end up being less once the final numbers come in. As far as ongoing expenses for the shelter, if this bond is approved, there is discussions that CityCare may try to fundraise for the ongoing costs so that it doesn't have to be bore by the general fund. But that's more a conversation, that the city needs to have with CityCare around that, because fundraising it's not guaranteed, and they don't know how the CityCare is going to go about that mechanisms for that fundraising. Currently, this is still on track to be part of the April ballot, but for confirmations, we're going to have to wait to see what happens in the city council meetings that are happening this January. The third part of this meeting was over amendments to the guest room tax ordinance. Bottom line of this is there is going to be a vote, again, most likely on the April ballot, to increase the tax for short-term rentals, which is hotels and Airbnbs, from 8% to 10%, with parks and recs getting most, if not all, of that 2% increase. Again, they kind of ran through the numbers, and rough estimate, it's looking at getting the parks department like 2.5 to 3 times the money they're going to be getting currently if this tax increase goes into effect. Now, there is some discussion over if Parks is going to get the whole 2% increase, if that is approved by the voters, or if they're only going to get the lion's share of it, with a little bit of it taken out for general discretion use by the city council. However, again, those are kind of discussions that still needs to be happen. What it looks like is the April ballot's going to come in, and it's just going to be over the increase on the tax rate, and then how much of that money gets allocated to parks versus other uses is going to be on a future ballot. So essentially, they want to try to lock in the tax increase and then decide how they're going to divvy up. Same with the previous ballot issue that we talked about with the homeless shelter is just kind of be on the lookout for this. If everything goes well in the January city council meetings, then it should be on the April ballot. Finally, there was a discussion around some potential amendments to the Norman city charter that have been discussed in the past. The first was around city council pay. For those who don't know, a city council will only get a maximum of $100 per month. This discussion was essentially tabled because they don't want to clutter the ballot too much. There's more important issues that are facing Norman right now. I actually tend to agree on this, right? Council pay can be handled on another day on another ballot. The next charter amendment that was discussed was changing the swear-in date from council members between where it is currently in July and reducing it down to the first Tuesday after the April election, which is the runoff election. This essentially is kind of just shifting when the 2-year term would start and end, and would make it so that, assuming you were elected in February, you would only have to wait, about 2 months before you're sworn in, as opposed to waiting all the way to July like it is currently, reducing the number of lame duck sessions. This charter amendment does look like it's going to be going forward on the April ballot, though, unlike the other ones. And then as a reminder, if any of these charter amendments are approved, they still have to be approved by the state, which is they have a process. The last kind of charter amendment took some time to get approved. So these changes would not be slated to go into effect currently if they pass. Most likely, I believe they mentioned the 2028 and 2029 elections is when this change would go through if it is approved. So with that, the meeting ended after about 2 hours and 15 minutes. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please don't hesitate to reach out for me at KyleForNorman@gmail.com. Thank you, and have a good day.